We'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast was produced, the Gadigal People of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present.
Hi team, Ant here. I've just got back from climbing Everest, so taking a quick break from the podcast. In the meantime, I thought this would be a great opportunity to take a look back at some of my favourite interviews with my fellow climbers. In this episode, you'll hear from Kenton Cool, Jim Davidson and Nimsdai Purja. First up, Kenton Cool. Summiting Everest is an impressive feat in itself, but doing it 18 times, that takes a seriously hardcore individual. Here's what Kenton had to say about it.
I found myself in that pit of kind of negative despair. One of the consultants came in and said, right, I'm going to operate on you tomorrow. And my immediate thought was, when can I climb? And he just laughed and said, you're never climbing again. You're never going to walk without a stick. And that spiraled me into that pit. But then about 10 days later, another consultant, John Handley, he said, I'm going to rebuild your foot to the best of my ability. And what you do after that is down to you and no one else. If you put the time and effort in, you will walk. You will, and he said, I'm not going to say you're going to climb, but it's down to you and how much energy and focus you put into your rehab. And those two different approaches from those two different consultants, that was the tipping point from being in the pit of despair and self, woe is me, to all of a sudden, actually I can do this and I will do this and I want to do this. And that was really powerful. That was for me, and I only realized this years later.
Yeah, of course.
Not at the time. Yeah, not at the time.
The penny finally drops, doesn't it? When you do something, you look back and you go, "Wow! If I hadn't." That's why I ask you in those moments, where your head was at and your mindset, because it's so important for people to realise that we have a choice.
I mean, for a while it was awful. Yeah, we have the choice, and the other really powerful thing is like negative motivation, and by this I mean, what do you stand to lose? And when that first consultant said to me, you're never going to climb again, I saw my community as I knew it, because I was so involved with climbing. Everything, my girlfriend climbed, all my buddies climbed, my whole cohort were climbers. And I stood to lose my community as I knew it. And that really scared me. And that was a huge motivator, because I didn't want to lose that. I thought, if I lose my community, I've got nothing. And that was one of the big driving forces. That was, I'm going to get on those parallel bars as soon as I can. I'm going to do those extra hydro sessions. I'm going to go to the gym in the hospital and just pump weights, do the pull downs, because there's certain exercises I could do, build my core so that when I could get back on my feet, recovery is going to be that much quicker.
This is why I really wanted to touch on this, because it's fascinating, because like you said, we have a choice, we have a mindset as well. Do we go down the negative mindset of being the victim, or do we really stand up and fight for what we believe in, where we want to be, where we think we should be in life? And yours was on the mountains. Now, what was your first mountain after your injury that you climbed, and do you remember it? And was that a moment where you thought, I'm back on track now?
Well, I suppose there's two things. One is I got back into rock climbing, so that's something I could do as soon as I could. I was actually still in a wheelchair, and I used to take myself down to a climbing wall in London that was really steep, and I could climb up literally just toe dapping, so just putting a little bit of weight through my feet. And then I'll be lowered straight back down into the wheelchair. So I got back into that quite quickly.
That's hardcore, mate. That is hardcore.
But you say that, but I didn't want to lose a community. I just wanted to be around, my friends, my cohort, those people that sort of elevated me. And if you can't go to the climbing wall, if you can't climb, well, your friends would come around and see you, but at the weekends, or on a Wednesday night, they're all down the climbing wall. And that's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be among those people that uplifted me and supported me, as much as I could. So my first proper foray back into the big mountains, it was a dear friend of mine, Alan Powell, had this idea of a new winter line in the Alps. And we went down and we started to climb on Christmas Day. And it was a hard route. It took us, 3 or 4 days, I forget now. And the story behind it is all a bit of an epic. But we managed to do it. And that was my first real reintroduction into the mountains. And it kind of proved to myself that, I had to approach things in a slightly different way. I had to give myself more time to do the walk-ins, to get to the bottom. I would always have problems moving away from a belay, so you strap yourself to the mountain and you wait there for what can be hours while your mate goes up and places all the ropes and things like that. And moving away would be hard because my ankles would seize up. So those first movements were very clunky, but you learn to adapt to what you have. And that was, wow, I can do this. And I will do this. And that was the green light. And it just started to snowball from there.
When did Mount Everest first come into your mind? When did you think, right, I'm gonna take on, I'm gonna stand on the apex of the world?
And not for a long time. I mean, it was late 2003. And so after the accident, what I did, when I realized I could do it again, I just was consuming climbing. That's all I did. I was working on building sites, and I was just doing multiple expeditions, to Greenland, to the Himalayas, to Pakistan. I just couldn't get enough of it. And it was on the back of quite a groundbreaking expedition to Nepal in 2003. And with the three of us, and we climbed this big new route. I think it was the second or third ascent of Annapurna 3, so just under 8,000 meters. We were on it for 10 days. We ran out of food, we ran out of fuel. And it took all of us to a super dark place. And it's really interesting, it actually affected our friendships because we went so deep that when we came out of it, we had issues sort of connecting with one another again because we all had our own journey in the darkness. And that was quite enlightening on how relationships can be affected by personal journeys, even though we were three of us together and in theory going through the same journey. It was very, very different for all three of us. Anyway, we got quite a lot of acclaim for that. And on the back of that, one of the British guiding companies who I was already working for rung me up and it just said, would you entertain going to Everest for us? And I had to think about it for about a nanosecond. And I just said yes. And that was the starting point of it. I mean, Everest had been beyond my financial capability. And to be honest, it was something which didn't interest me because it wasn't technical hard climbing. It was just never in my wheelhouse. And then it became so obvious that, show me one climber who can honestly, hand on heart, say that at some stage in their career or their life, they haven't thought about going to Everest. And that was probably November, December 2003. And I found myself on the mountain for the first time, spring 2004, feeling very out of my depth, not quite knowing how it all works, having a great Sirdar. Sirdar is the head Sherpa who kind of tells you how it all works. And I loved it. I absolutely adored it. And I just wanted more.
My next guest faced unimaginable heartbreak whilst doing the sport he loved. Jim Davidson was climbing Mount Rainier in 1992 with his best mate Mike when tragedy struck. He shared what happened on this horrific day with myself.
So we're moving together, and I was probing with my ice axe, as we had been for tens of thousands of times over the last 3 or 4 days. And I probed ahead, and the snow looked solid, and it felt solid. And when I stuck my axe in it, it firmed up in the snow. But when I took that next step and put my foot forward, my foot sank in up to my shin and then up to my knee. And at first I thought it was just soft snow and it'll firm up underneath my foot. But that's not what happened. Suddenly I started accelerating, and I realized I was no longer standing on a solid glacier. I was standing on a big, weak snow bridge going across a huge crevasse, and that snow bridge was starting to collapse beneath my feet.
And that happens within a split second, right? Split second.
Absolutely. I didn't even think about it. I actually heard myself yelling, "Falling!" That would give Mike a chance to drop to the snow and dig in with his ice axe and catch my fall. But I couldn't even turn around because this was all happening so fast. And immediately I sunk up to my waist, and I tried to slam my axe onto the surface of the snow. And the pick went in all the way to the head of the axe, which means a really deep burial in the snow. But it's about noontime now on June 21st, the longest, sunniest day of the year. And the top snow was all wet and soft, and my ice axe pick just cut right through the snow like a knife through butter. And I realized I couldn't stop myself. And then all of a sudden, my head went underneath the snow bridge, and everything went dark. And I realized I was inside the crevasse and accelerating into the mountain.
Wow. So this happens in a split second. I know it all too well. Your foot goes in, you go down to your knee, and you just think, do you know what? I've got a bit of tough snow in front of me. I'm steady. I'm just going to plow through. Then whack, before you know it, you're completely covered. So you're in the crevasse and you're completely covered. How do you communicate with Mike?
Well, at this point, we're in two different worlds. I'm inside the crevasse, and there's just a little man-sized hole about 2 feet across that had collapsed beneath my feet. The rope goes up through that hole and back to Mike. So I'm plummeting vertically into the darkness. I'm swinging my ice axe around, trying to hook the sidewalls, and I couldn't reach either sidewall. And I realized, oh, this is a big crevasse. And I knew my partner Mike would be digging in because he's so well trained, and I know he was digging in. I wasn't going super fast, but my brain started guessing how far in I'd gotten. I couldn't talk to Mike because he was above the snow and I'm below it. And I started picking up speed, and my brain guessed I'd gone 20 feet in, 30 feet in. And I thought, that's not right. Mike should have stopped me by now. Then my brain guesses 40 feet. And I thought, 40 feet? We're only separated by about 50 feet of rope. I thought, come on, Mike, stop me, stop me. I felt the rope jerk once, and I slowed down, and I almost stopped. And then I accelerated twice as fast into the darkness. Now, I didn't know what that meant at the time. I was just overwhelmed with the sensations, and I couldn't figure out what was happening. But I know now what happened, which was my partner Mike did his job, and he dug in to the snow and slowed me down for the first 50 feet as I fell into the crevasse. But as I went deeper, the rope pulled Mike closer and closer to the lip of the crevasse, and the same wet snow that caused me to fall into the crevasse in the first place wouldn't let Mike stop. And he got pulled over the lip of the crevasse, pulled into the crevasse, and tied together, the two of us sailed deeper inside the mountain into the darkness.
So when you're falling and Mike is obviously on the other end of the rope, do you then see Mike go past you in the crevasse, or do you stop together? How does that pan out when you now know that actually Mike is in the crevasse with me?
Yeah, when I thought I'd been falling first in the first 50 feet because it felt fast to me. But once Mike got pulled in and gravity had a full grip on us, I just kept accelerating even faster and faster. And that's when I knew that he had to be in there with me. We were both free falling. And I thought for sure we'd be dead. There's a word for this, as you know, in climbing. When you fall in a crevasse, crevasses get skinnier and skinnier, narrower and narrower as you go down. And when you fall in with great velocity, you can get stuck in there, wedged in like a cork in a wine bottle. And I thought, man, we're going to get corked at the bottom of this thing. And I hit one wall lightly with my shoulder, and I began to ricochet from one wall to the other, getting beat up as I went, hitting my head, hitting my back. And that probably took a little speed off me, but all of a sudden, I slammed to a stop. The air burst out of my lungs kind of, and, I lost my breath. And I looked up, and I saw a little point of light, and I couldn't understand what the light was. In fact, it was the surface of the snow far above my head. And then all of a sudden, wet snow started falling on my legs. And that was the snow bridge that had collapsed, and the snow that Mike had sort of snow plowed into that little hole. So all this huge, massive snow, like a truckload of snow, started falling down and started burying me from my feet upwards. And I panicked and tried to sit up, but my pack was wedged, corked between the two ice walls that were about 1.5 feet apart from one another. So I couldn't sit up and I couldn't stand up. I was stuck, facing upward, lying down towards the surface as the snow just piled up on me and up and up. And I was afraid I was going to get totally buried. So I put my hands over my head like I'd learned in avalanche survival class. And then a big impact hit with a lot of weight. I figured out later that was Mike and his pack and more snow. Mike landed on me and more snow fell on. And if someone had been standing there when it all stopped, it would have just probably been a pile of snow with a little rope and a little bit of gear sticking out because both Mike and I were buried.
Wow. That's giving me goosebumps because I've done, crevasse training and, it all, comes together in training because it's all in a controlled and safe environment. When everything comes to a halt and you're there in complete silence, what's your next thought process? What is going through your head in that very moment once everything sort of stops and you realize actually I'm in a real bad situation here?
It was so overwhelming because it had all happened in just a second or two. I falling through the crevasse, falling through the air, landing in the snow falling on me. I thought to myself, I can't believe this. I just survived the fall somehow, and I can still think, yet I'm trapped. I'm buried. I tried to push with my arms and legs, and I couldn't get out. And that's when panic started setting in. I thought, I've got to get out. I can't breathe. I had managed to keep one hand in front of my face, and I had a small air pocket about the size of a football. But I knew that wouldn't last very long, so I'm trying to push and push. And I'd heard in avalanche survival class and avalanche training classes that if you get buried by avalanche debris, it's like being held down by 1,000 cold, wet hands. And that's what it felt like to me. I could feel the cold and the wetness and the moisture, but I was panicking so bad in my chest because I knew that I needed air any second now. And I pushed and pushed, and eventually my good right arm burst out of the snow, and I swept away a little snow. I only had about maybe 10 inches of snow pile up on my face. So I swept the snow a little bit and spit out a snowball that had jammed in my mouth and caught a few rushed breaths. And I realized I was okay and I could breathe, but I was buried right up to my chin. And I could see a little bit of Mike's gear nearby, but in the darkness, I couldn't see where he was. I knew he had to be nearby because I knew he fell in with me. And I yelled, Mike, where are you? Pull me out before it freezes. Because I'm thinking, we're trapped in this wet snow. And there's ice on both sides of us, the glacial ancient ice. It's going to freeze the whole thing into a mass of ice pretty soon. And I'd hoped that he'd go, oh, there you are, Jim, and pull me out. But and that's not what happened. When he answered back, he didn't answer back with words. He answered with a groan. And I knew my friend and partner was hurt really bad.
So you're literally 80 feet in this crevasse. Just describe the environment. So you've managed to dig yourself out of, I can only describe it as an ice coffin. You're now free up to your waist. Mike is obviously at arm's length away from you. Is that correct? And can you see any light when you look up? Or are you completely in the darkness?
There was a little bit of light. I could see shapes pretty well, and I could see a little bit of colors. But the thing is, when sunlight goes through the ice filters out the reds and yellow and green wavelengths. So the only light that gets through is blue. And the deeper you go into crevasse, the bluer it gets. And this is the bluest crevasse I'd ever seen. It was a deep, dark blue, deep, dark shadows everywhere. And I could feel the fear above me. I could feel something looming above me. But frankly, I was so focused on Mike, I didn't have time. And I also think then I didn't have the courage to look up. I knew that there was something really bad up above our heads, but I had to keep doing CPR on Mike. So I was doing compressions on him, and I was trapped behind him. I was basically reaching with my arm around him from his back and touching his chest with the palm of my hand. And I knew it wasn't the right way to give compressions. I'm supposed to be above him and get both palms and my body weight into it. But it's all I could do. So I was behind him. I kept pressing his chest back against my own and sort of squeezing him between my one hand and my own breastbone. And I kept it up for a long time. And then I'd give him some breaths, and I cleared his airway, and I gave him more breaths. And I kept it up for a while, and I was starting to panic because I was hoping that I would just give him 2 or 3 breaths and that he would suddenly wake up and go, oh, I'm fine. Thanks for doing that, Jim. But that's not what happened. And after maybe another 20 minutes of CPR, I realized it wasn't coming around. And I knew I was supposed to keep it going to keep him alive, but I also knew I couldn't keep it up forever because I'm still trapped in the snow and it's going to freeze solid. And one person can't do CPR for hours or days. It just doesn't work. But I kept going for a while longer, and I checked vitals a second time, and I still didn't feel anything, and I finally had to stop. And I knew my good friend and partner, Mike, was deceased, and my head just dropped onto his chest. My chin started quivering in fear, and water started filling my eyes up, and I was just ready to give up. I thought, Mike's the better climber here. If he's dead, I'm going to be dead soon too, and I felt like just giving up. before I could even get the courage to look up and see where we were.
And whilst all this is happening, you're still attached to him on a rope, aren't you? You are still attached together like an umbilical cord whilst you're giving the CPR, whilst you're doing everything. Is that correct?
Absolutely. We're still a team. We're still tied together. And that rope was all weaving in and out of the snow pile that Mike and I were still buried in. And he was sort of on top of me, but the rope goes in and out of the snow, and it's all starting to get wet from water dripping from above. And I can feel the cold emanating out of the ice walls. They were only about 2 feet apart where we were. We were in a little pile of snow about 6 or 7 feet long and about 2 feet wide. And I assumed we were on the bottom of the crevasse because that made sense. We fell to the bottom. And even though I was ready to give up and start crying, I had a little voice in the back of my head that was like, you've got to get out. Get out of the snow before you freeze in. And I got this rush of panic again. So I started thrashing at the snow and I dug my way out. It took me 20 minutes. And I tried to rush it. My knee was torqued. I was buried underneath a piece of ice and a pack. And as soon as I got out, I got above Mike and I could do compressions the right way. So I started in again. But it had been, 40 minutes by now since I'd heard him breathe. And it didn't bring him back. And again, my head dropped onto his chest. And then I began to think about the question that you asked. Where are we? What's above us? And I was very fearful. But I kind of sat up on my knees and started looking up. And the ice walls were about 2 feet apart where we were. Then they spread out to about 3 and 4 feet apart from one another. And the angle was about 70 degrees and then 80 degrees. And then I looked up, up, and up. And the walls were dead vertical. And they got out to about 6 feet apart from one another. And then I looked up, up, up. And way up top, the walls started overhanging to come back together. And that's where the snow bridge was at the top of the crevasse. And that hole in the snow bridge, that way back to the world, was about 80 feet above our heads. And I said in a quivering voice, oh man, Mike, we are in trouble. We are in big, big trouble. I had no idea how we could ever get out of that.
I want to ask you a really difficult question. You're attached to your buddy. You realise that he's no longer with you. You look up and you think, right, I've got to get out of here. 1, I've got to get out of here to tell our story. 2, to get to safety so we can potentially get Mike's body back. 3, hopefully one of us will live to live on the legacy of one another. But that moment when you realise he's gone and you have to unclip from your partner, almost leaving him there, that must have been one of the toughest decisions in your life.
It was the symbolism of unclipping from him was too great. Partners are supposed to take care of each other in the mountains, in life, in the military. We don't leave people behind. I couldn't bring Mike back from the dead. I knew that, but he was still my partner and still my responsibility. So as I started slowly trying to figure out how I might be able to climb this wall, I didn't really believe I could because I was a good ice climber, but not world class. And back then in 1992, nobody was climbing overhanging ice like that. Certainly not me. We had straight shafted and straight pick tools back then. It was just beyond even the best pros in the world. So I had to untie him at one point, but I never wanted to leave him unanchored. So I worked a system out of using a second anchor. I put an ice screw into the wall and I anchored his body to that. And then I had to take the rope off him because I was going to need the full rope to climb out. But before I started that climbing, I again tied Mike back into the end of the rope. So before I even started climbing, I figured I had 150 feet of rope between my body and his, and we were still a team, and I was going to have to make it out of there on that rope because that's all the rope I had. I refused to start climbing untied to my partner. So that I worked out a complicated system to make sure he was always secured and that we were still connected. And as you can tell, it's an emotional memory, but I think it was part of what the strength that I needed to start climbing, because I wasn't climbing out just for me. I was climbing out for Mike because my friend had just given his life to save mine. I couldn't not have the courage to even try and finish the job. So I think staying connected, Mike, was critical to me starting. And later on, when I ran out of strength and confidence on the wall several times, I would pull on the rope and feel Mike's body down below stretching with the dynamic climbing cord. And that would remind me that I was climbing not just for me, but for him too, and for his family. So I could look them in the eye and tell them what happened. So staying connected with your partners, in this case, physically or through a rope or emotionally, is critical to doing your best even after those partners are gone.
My final guest is a man I'm lucky enough to call a really good friend. Nimsdai Purja and I go back 20 years, and he was the one that actually gave me the nudge to climb K2. Here's a story from my interview with him earlier this year. Let's quickly touch on K2 Winter, because that was mission impossible, and you made it possible. And when are we going to see that come into light, and when are we going to see that hit our screens?
Hopefully soon. What we managed to do as a team together, but also as a leadership. Of course, I had all my Sherpas really paid well, and arguably I could be the first person to be there. Perhaps if I plan it for my own glory, on my success, on my name, and all that, and that's how the whole expedition has been in the past. But I'm a man of fairness, and I always believe that since we all are working together, why we don't take and share equal success, equal name, equal glory. And K2 was the only mountain in the world that was never climbed in winter. You name whatever the best mountaineer in the world, you guys, you name it, they all have tried it, nobody made it.
But it's
So
not accessible. K2 isn't accessible at the best of times, let alone in winter.
winter, yeah, even in summer, it's
Yeah, you
tough.
can't.
It's tough.
It's not accessible. Sometimes you can't even access the mountain in summer. What I loved is that viral moment of you on K2 Winter with your Nepalese team
Yeah,
walking to the summit, hand in hand, cuddling together, singing the national anthem. Is that right?
yeah,
The
yeah,
Nepalese
yeah,
national
yeah,
anthem to the
yeah.
very summit. What a moment, what a life defining, changing moment in the community that Nepal absolutely deservedly cherished from. What a
Oh,
moment.
bro, that was like, I still remember, like, as we gather around, and then our last climber wasn't that far as well, so we all gather around, and as we walk to the summit, I think because every soul felt really respected and there was equal joy. I didn't even care about the view, and it was just that energy, because most of the guys were in tears, when we're like, and when we see it. And it was a so much power of spirit, power of happiness, power of fairness, power of sharing the joy. And that's when we again put Nepal into global map. So yeah, it was the best thing. But also what I managed to do here, and was when I did the 14 peaks straight away after the documentary, the Western climbers start criticizing me. And quite rightly, David Goggins says that if you even walk into the water, they will say he's walking in the water because he cannot swim. So anyway, but it had got to me. So I was like, okay. So at this point, before I did the summit brief, we checked the weather. I read the weather out. Now here's the weather, team. We need to go and climb this. But one team member among us has to climb, at least one has to go without oxygen. And I asked individually, and the team said no. And at this point, the team didn't knew what I was going through. So I had a frostbite, on a frost nip on my three fingers here and three fingers here. But I was wearing small gloves, and I was hiding it because as a leader, you don't want to show the weakness. But at this point, because little things matter on the big mountains, and those little mindset is the difference between success and the failure.
Hmm.
And I didn't want it to
And
show them
life
any
and death.
weakness. Exactly. So at this point, for the first time, I take my gloves out and I said, guys, look, my three fingers here, three fingers here, I have a frost nip. I would 100% go and climb this without oxygen. But if I go without oxygen, as your body feel colder, you know and I already have frostnip. That means I'll go into frostbite and I wouldn't be able to use this hand, and I probably die. So can anybody take this responsibility? Because I knew that Western community will criticize again. We just need to do this clean and cut, no criticize. Because doesn't matter what you do, the Western media is so big that you cannot go and keep telling everybody. So I just want it 100% done clean. So
So big and so brutal.
yeah. And nobody step up again. For me, I was like, okay, now I have to do it. And I was so much worried because how I keep up with this guy without oxygen, and so that we climb together. And by this point, I had faced so much the real brutality, the reality of 1,000 meters, where you don't know who is bored by who's where, who's there. So I was thinking, if I'm late by the 10 meters point, then somebody's just gonna go and take all the glory, and the equal division won't be there, and all that is stuff. So I was like, okay, but anyway, you know, I was right at the front, managed to stop, and the first post we made it, and this is what the special forces teach you: anticipation. We talked about the team, and the first post was about the team. And guess what? It's straight away the Western community saying that, oh, it's not a great because it was with oxygen and all that. I'm just waiting with there. I was like, okay. And I even wanted to tell this story, but I saw some of the comments devaluing the achievement. And those people who were criticizing were some of my Western friends who had summited mountains on the lines me and
That
my
you
team have fixed
fixed.
it.
Yeah.
And it really hurt me. And after 2 days of like getting criticized, Big Maji, dear brother came and Nims, you just need to say it because it's too much now. We just need to kill the negativity. And that's when I said, okay, I have done without oxygen. But yeah, the story is so powerful, but it was again with the purpose. So that's what it got us there.
Thanks for joining me for this special best of episode. I'll be back with new episodes soon, but in the meantime, if you'd like to catch up and hear these 3 powerful conversations in full, you'll find links to them in the show notes. I'm at Middleton. See you in the next episode.